For over 2 centuries, humans bent over backwards to be accepted by the Galactic Council. When we first stumbled into the wider universe, naive and bleeding from our own wars, we showed up with hands open and heads low. We came in peace. We always came in peace. But no one ever really wanted peace with us. They called us low-tier mammals, dirt worlders, and resource pests. Behind every handshake was a sterilization scan. Behind every smile was a law we hadn't been told about. But we still tried, still believed. The council said we had to prove ourselves, not just technologically, but morally. Fine. So we obeyed. We played by the rules. We joined their missions, fought their wars, delivered their aid, paid their taxes. We even accepted their sanctions when we outperformed them. But every time we rose up a little too high, someone found a reason to knock us back down. It wasn't one single event that broke us. It was the piling of disrespect like sand on a glass plate, one grain at a time. The last grain wasn't special. It just happened to be the one that shattered everything underneath. That grain was Chiral Station. It was a diplomatic outpost orbiting the neutral moon of Glathion 3. Humans made up nearly half of the staff there, coexisting with 11 other species. We'd invested billions into that station. Energy, tech, even people's lives. It was meant to be a symbol of unity. Instead, it became a grave. It started small. A human engineer, Lorna Keene, reported missing supplies. Then a comms officer noticed encrypted traffic from unauthorized terminals. A few days later, a diplomatic assistant overheard something she wasn't meant to hear. Something about phase transitions and containment failures. She sent one final message back to Earth. We're not alone in this sabotage, but they'll blame us. I know it. Hours later, Chiral Station exploded. 234 lives lost. 97 of them were human. The official council report blamed human negligence, said it was a systems failure in a human-made power relay. The same power relay that had been signed off by 3 non-human inspectors. Earth's diplomats protested. Our scientists countered their report with raw data. We begged for a joint investigation. The council laughed. They said we were trying to cover our embarrassment with conspiracy theories, that we didn't understand how things worked in the galaxy. They revoked our license to develop new orbital stations, froze our trade partnerships, labeled us reckless, emotionally unstable, and through it all, we stayed quiet, at least on the surface. But below, something shifted. The Earth United Assembly went dark. Public appearances ceased. Trade routes were rerouted without explanation. Military communications became encrypted beyond even council clearance. Then colonies started sending home whispers. Old fleets, once mothballed, were being reactivated. Civilian shipyards were mass-producing hulls with armor plating. Mars launched 20 new research satellites in a week. Saturn's rings blinked with strange patterns of coordinated ship maneuvers. Nobody responded to council inquiries. We weren't angry, not anymore. We were done. Then came the moment the galaxy would never forget. It was the 10th cycle of the council year, during the Pan-Species Assembly. Delegates from all sectors were gathered in the core chamber. The council president was giving a speech about interstellar unity when the entire room went silent. Not because of what was said, but because every light dimmed. Every comm channel dropped. Every orbiting defense drone turned, and Earth spoke. Not with diplomats, not with a weapon, but with a message. 12 words transmitted across every channel, in every known language. We asked for peace. You gave us graves. Now you'll understand pain. The feed cut. A moment later, 6 council-controlled starbases went offline. Gone. Wiped out so cleanly that even the surrounding debris was vaporized. No species spoke. No one dared to retaliate, because it wasn't just an attack. It was a warning. Earth had patience, but it had limits, and they had just found out what waited on the other side. The galaxy stood still. For the first time in recorded history, not a single species responded with outrage. No calls for retaliation. No demands for war tribunals. No coordinated response fleets. The silence that followed Earth's message was a silence rooted not in confusion, but in fear, because everyone understood the implications. 6 council starbases had disappeared. Not attacked, not disabled, gone. And not just any bases. Each one had layered defenses, redundant shield networks, and orbital monitoring systems designed by the most advanced species in the galaxy. They weren't built to be impenetrable. They were built to be untouchable. Monuments of strength meant to remind the galaxy of the Council's dominance. Now they were dust, and no one had even seen the shots fired. It wasn't just a show of force. It was a statement. We are not like you. We are not playing by your rules anymore. Behind closed doors, the Council was in shambles. The High Circle met in emergency session. Dozens of species, some having once viewed humanity as nothing more than a curious backwater anomaly, now sat in silence around the grand obsidian table that formed the heart of the Galactic Core's governing body. They watched the footage again, the broadcast Earth had sent. 12 words, plain, emotionless, not yelled, not frantic, delivered in a calm, neutral tone, translated into the native language of every listening species, as if Earth had rehearsed the moment for centuries. And that made it worse. This wasn't some impulsive act of rage. This was planned. We retaliate, asked the Baroon diplomat, a quadrupedal species known for their mercenary fleets. We can't, muttered the Varine ambassador. Their speech carried through a low harmonic vibration that made some ears ring. You didn't feel it. That message, it wasn't just a warning. It was the opening of a campaign. They took down 6 stations in 6 sectors simultaneously, without crossing a single border, added the Kralon overseer. They didn't attack from the front. They attacked from inside. Then a chilling realization passed through the room, unspoken. They had no idea how the attacks were carried out. No recorded energy signatures. No known weapons detected. No warnings from early detection systems. The starbases were simply erased. Not destroyed in fire and fury. Just gone. Disintegrated, like they'd never existed. Someone suggested a covert operation to capture a human fleet. Another demanded a fleet be sent to the Sol system to assert control. The Avenari delegate, an ancient and powerful race that once considered humanity a mere scientific curiosity, raised one long bark-like limb and spoke only one line. If they let us see this, imagine what they haven't shown yet. Meanwhile, on Earth, the world was different now. Public unity had never been stronger. There were no riots, no protests, no division between nations. For once, every country on Earth had come to the same conclusion. They had been used, bled dry while trying to play nice with species that saw them as inferior. Earth's skies now shimmered with an invisible net, an interlocked defense grid powered by a new energy source the Council had never been granted access to. Even satellites orbiting Earth's moon had changed. Armed, shielded, intelligent. Human colonies across the solar system, once considered vulnerable outposts, now pulsed with coordinated coded activity. Ships moved in precise formations, as if every asteroid field and dust cloud had become part of some larger tactical design. And somewhere in orbit, just beyond the sensors of any foreign probe, a vessel unlike anything in the Council's archive sat cloaked in gravitational distortion. Project Eidolon. It had no official designation, no records. It had been constructed in absolute secrecy, in the dark mines beneath Europa's frozen crust. Not by one nation, but by all of Earth's powers combined. Scientists, engineers, even defectors from other species who had grown tired of the Council's tyranny. Eidolon was not just a weapon. It was a philosophy, the embodiment of humanity's new doctrine. We will not be ruled. We will not be ignored. It was Eidolon that had vaporized the 6 star bases, using a weapon system so advanced it didn't need traditional projectiles or energy beams. It weaponized space itself, created ripples in gravity strong enough to fold matter out of existence. Clean, quiet, absolute. But Earth's goal wasn't conquest. It wasn't colonization. It was a message. We are no longer asking for a seat at the table. Aboard the bridge of the Eidolon, the silence was thick. Commander Arel stood in front of the blackened viewport, her hands clasped behind her back. Her eyes weren't cold, but they were tired. Not from the weight of command, but from waiting. Waiting for someone to do the right thing. They never did. They'll respond with diplomacy, said her second-in-command, a soft-spoken tactical officer named Tren. Let them, Errol replied. We're not negotiating anymore. Not until every name from Carol's station is acknowledged. Not until every lie is corrected. Not until we stop being an afterthought. They'll spin it, Tren muttered. They always do. Then we give them a choice. Accept the truth, or witness another silence. Back in the council chambers, a decision was reached. Not through consensus, but through fear. The official response was to be one of cautious inquiry. A delegation would be sent to Earth, not in strength, but in submission. No war fleets, no armed escorts, just diplomats. The ship chosen for the mission was the Virolith Dawn, an old diplomatic cruiser outfitted with peace insignias and one of the most respected ambassadors in the galaxy. She arrived in Earth orbit 3 days later, and she was met not with weapons, but with a human voice. State your purpose. The voice came from every speaker, every frequency, in perfect unison. We come seeking dialogue, replied the ambassador. Too late for dialogue, the voice responded, but not too late for truth. The cruiser was granted permission to land, but only one representative was allowed to step foot on Earth. They chose a young envoy, a hybrid-born diplomat named Elira, raised in both council and human environments. She had no loyalties but truth, no rank to lose, and no agenda. She was met on the landing pad by 3 humans in black. No titles, no names, just a question. Why now? Elira took a breath. Because the galaxy is afraid. Of what? She looked them in the eye. Her voice didn't tremble. Of what you've become. One of the humans tilted his head. No. The galaxy is afraid of what it made us become. They took her underground through halls filled with names etched in steel. Names of the fallen from Kiral's station. Names from old wars. From diplomatic missions that were never reported. From colonists abandoned because of political bargaining. She walked in silence until they reached a room. Inside, a simple table, a single chair, and a data pad. Read, the human said. Then decide if the council still deserves peace. The pad contained the truth. Intercepted communications showing council knowledge of the chiral sabotage before it happened. Internal memos discussing how a disaster would slow Earth's growing influence. Signed orders redirecting emergency response ships away from Kiral during the explosion window. It wasn't negligence. It was murder. Elira felt her chest tighten. Her species, her government, her people. They knew, and they let it happen. I didn't know, she whispered. That's what everyone says, came the quiet reply. Until they do. She left Earth changed, returned to the council with the full data dump, knowing it would shake the very foundations of their structure. But Earth didn't wait. Before the council could meet, Earth did something no one expected. They opened the files to everyone, not just governments, not just leaders. Every citizen on every council-aligned world received the truth in their personal inbox. No filters, no blocks. The raw, undeniable evidence of council treachery. And the galaxy cracked. Protests erupted. Council buildings were stormed. Alien species who had once mocked humanity now stood with their fists clenched, demanding justice. And amidst the chaos, a new message was broadcast. We were patient. We were peaceful. You chose to test us. Now you will watch us lead. Earth did not send armies. It sent hope to the oppressed, the silenced, the forgotten. They called it the Accord, a new system, a new council, built not on dominance, but on accountability. Any species could join, but only those who had nothing to hide dared step forward. The council laughed at first. Then their outer colonies declared independence and joined Earth. Then their soldiers stopped following orders. Then their ships stopped responding. Within weeks, the once mighty council was splintered. And Earth? Earth became the center of a new era. Not because they wanted it, because they earned it. Because the moment humanity's patience ended was the moment the galaxy was finally forced to listen. At first, the galaxy didn't know how to react. In every system, from the frozen moons of the Aurelian Belt to the floating sky cities of Qualis Prime, people stared at their screens, speechless. The evidence was overwhelming. Not doctored, not interpreted, just raw recordings and internal communications, all laid bare. It showed not only the truth behind the chiral station disaster, but a pattern. Decades of manipulation, quiet exterminations, embargoes disguised as protection, and entire species used as political pawns. And there, at the center of it all, stood Earth, the species that had spent over 200 years trying to play by the rules. The one species that had begged, pleaded, compromised, and humbled itself at every turn until it couldn't anymore. And now, the Council was on the back foot for the first time in over a millennium. The protests were not localized. They were not brief. They were not small. Entire populations turned on their own leadership. Civil servants resigned in droves. Riots broke out in Council homeworlds, where humans had never even set foot. Statues of former Council founders were pulled down. Council ambassadors found themselves stranded in spaceports, chased out by the very people they claimed to represent. The phrase, "They were right about us," echoed everywhere. But Earth didn't gloat. They didn't celebrate. They didn't send in fleets to liberate anyone. They simply said, "We're not here to conquer. We're here to rebuild something better, together." That's when the accord gained traction. It started as a whisper, a rumor that maybe Earth wasn't seeking revenge after all. That maybe, just maybe, they were offering another way. Not out of weakness, but out of wisdom. The first species to sign on were the ones who had suffered the most under the Council. The Voshari miners, long forced into indentured labor. The Drenok tribes, who had been pushed off their ancestral planets to make room for Council-run factories. The Zalan engineers, whose inventions were confiscated for safety reasons. These species sent delegates to Earth, not under armed escort, but voluntarily. They didn't find thrones. They didn't find empires. They found meeting rooms, open forums, equal seats, and slowly, the accord grew. 10 species joined in the first month, then 20. By the third month, it had 75 signatories, and not a single one left, because they weren't just welcomed, they were respected. On the other side of the stars, the Council was rotting from within. Accusations flew between former allies. The Kralin blamed the Artari. The Varine claimed their transmissions had been forged. The Avenari quietly tried to erase their voting records from the historical logs. But the data was permanent now, backed up across Accord satellites, decentralized, immutable. Every excuse was torn apart. Internal leaks followed. Entire species began purging their own corrupt officials. Trials broke out. Some former Council leaders were imprisoned by their own people. Others vanished before they could be caught. But Earth didn't lift a finger. They didn't send assassins, didn't launch attacks, didn't demand tribute. They only said, "Clean your house, or your house will collapse." It was working. But not everyone accepted the new reality. There were still those who believed in the old ways, who saw the Accord as a threat to the galaxy's natural order. One such group was the Keltraz Syndicate, a faction of former Council loyalists, mercenaries, and exiled nobles, who refused to recognize Earth's rise. They branded themselves as protectors of tradition, and they had resources. War fleets, black market weapons, and entire systems still loyal to the Council banner. And they wanted blood. They attacked 3 newly inducted Accord worlds, launching strikes on communication hubs and power stations. On Valith Prime, they bombed a refugee medical ship mid-evacuation. They thought they'd provoke Earth. They thought Earth would come down on them with overwhelming force, create another Kyril-style incident they could use to sway public opinion back in their favor. But Earth didn't respond with bombs. They responded with truth. Within hours of the attacks, Earth released video footage, intercepted transmissions, and visual confirmation of Keltraz command centers ordering the strikes. And then, for the first time since the fall of the Council, humanity gave a speech. It wasn't a president, not a general, not a diplomat. It was a child. Her name was Mara, 13 years old, born on a colony ship orbiting Neptune. Her parents had died during the sabotage at Kytril Station. She stood in front of a plain white backdrop, wearing no uniform, no makeup, no symbol of any political faction, just a girl, a survivor. And she looked directly into the camera and said, "I don't know why they hate us. I just know they do. My mom used to tell me, one day they'll see us, really see us. But they didn't. They saw a threat, a target. And now I'm alone. So if you're still following the people who did this, ask yourself if your pride is worth more than our lives. The speech was less than 2 minutes long, but it brought an entire galaxy to tears. Even species that didn't cry by nature sat in stunned silence. The Keltraz Syndicate tried to claim it was emotional propaganda, but no one believed them. Because for once, the message didn't come from a leader trying to win a war. It came from a child trying to stop one. Earth gave the Syndicate one chance. Withdraw, disband, surrender those responsible for the attacks. The Syndicate responded by bombing a humanitarian convoy in the Nalari sector. This time, Earth didn't send a warning. They sent Eidolon. In less than 8 minutes, the entire Keltraz fleet was erased. Not crippled, not routed. Gone. This time, Earth didn't even broadcast a message afterward. The silence spoke louder. The message was clear. You only get so many chances. The galaxy didn't cry for the Syndicate. They didn't mourn. Because they'd seen the data. They'd heard the lies. They'd watched the cruelty. And now, they had seen what justice looked like. Not revenge. Justice. The Accord expanded faster than anyone predicted. Within a year, more than 200 species had joined. Planets that had once been enemies were now sharing resources. Science labs collaborated openly. Trade routes blossomed, no longer choked by artificial restrictions or tariffs meant to suppress technological growth. Earth didn't lead the Accord as a master. They led as an equal. But everyone knew who had made it possible. For generations, humanity had been the punchline of the galaxy. The upstarts, the emotional ones, the primitives. Now they were the guardians of balance. Because when the Council had broken its promises, when diplomacy failed, when patience ran dry, humanity did not turn into monsters. They turned into mirrors. They held up the truth and made the galaxy look. And it would never be the same again. But peace, true peace, was not easy. As the Accord gained ground, former Council power blocks began to stir in secret. They didn't attack directly. Instead, they used smaller factions, smugglers, assassins, planted operatives. One such operative infiltrated an Accord intelligence outpost on Luna Station and sabotaged a new planetary shield prototype. It failed during a scheduled stress test, vaporizing a test team of 9, including 4 Voshari researchers. Once again, the old wounds were ripped open. Whispers began. Is Earth still protecting us? Are we safe under the Accord? Earth responded not with another strike, but with transparency. They released every log, every recording, every internal report of the incident. No cover-up, no excuses. Then they issued an open challenge. To those who still operate in shadows, we will not chase you. We will wait. Because we know the truth always finds its way to light. The operative was captured 2 days later by a Keltraz loyalist cell trying to extract him. He was handed over, not to Earth, but to a multi-species tribunal created by the Accord itself. That's when everyone understood. This wasn't about humans anymore. This was about accountability for everyone. And so, the stars changed. Where once the Council logo marked oppression, now the Accord banner stood for something else. Not perfection, not power, but potential. And Earth? Earth went quiet again. Not because they were retreating, but because their job was never to rule. It was to remind the galaxy what happens when you push too far. Because humanity's patience had a limit, and beyond that limit was something no species would ever want to face again. It had been 17 standard months since Earth delivered its final warning. 17 months since the Keltraz Syndicate was wiped from the stars. 17 months since the Accord bloomed from whispers into law. The galaxy was rebuilding, not in the old image, but in something new, something shared. Trade between former enemies flourished. Technology that had once been hoarded was now open-sourced and distributed across Accord networks. Planets that were once stripped for Council profits were now being restored by multi-species restoration teams. It was working. But peace, even in its best form, is fragile. In a universe this big, with scars this deep, not everyone wants peace. There are those who need war the way a body needs a heartbeat. And in the far reaches of unmonitored space, past the asteroid clouds of Cora 12, beyond the collapsed warp lanes of the shattered crescent. They waited. The remnants, not just of the Council, but of something older, something far more dangerous. They called themselves the Veil. Not a faction, not a nation, an ideology. They didn't want power, they wanted control. Where the Council had failed with politics, they believed in silence, total invisible domination. If the Accord represented light, the Veil was the cold gravity behind it, dragging systems into the dark, one by one. They never claimed responsibility, never left witnesses, and for months, they moved unnoticed. Ships began disappearing along fringe trade routes. Beacon stations went dark, and then came the disappearances. Not deaths, disappearances. Entire colonies, thousands of people, vanished without a trace. No debris, no distress calls, just gone. At first, the Accord assumed it was piracy, a resurgence of Keltraz loyalists. But this was cleaner, quieter, coordinated. Something was happening, and Earth knew it. They always did. In a bunker beneath the Arctic Circle, 4 humans stood around a projection. The hollow table displayed a 3D map of the galaxy, riddled with blinking markers. Red for missing convoys, orange for communication anomalies, and gray for confirmed colony losses. One of the men, older, white-streaked hair, leaned forward and tapped a blinking icon in the Graven Reach sector. This one was different, he said. No forced entry, no life signs, no environmental damage. But the data core is gone. Another woman, a systems analyst named Nadia, spoke without looking up. They didn't just take people, they took history. The fourth, younger than the others, looked between them, tension in his jaw. They're not raiding us, he muttered. They're erasing us. The room fell silent. Finally, the older man nodded. We need to escalate. Deploy Eidolon? Nadia asked. No, he said. We don't even know where to point it. This isn't a war we can shoot our way through. He paused. We need to find them first. Earth didn't announce this new threat to the galaxy. They didn't want panic. Instead, they did what humans had always done best when pushed into a corner. They adapted. A classified initiative was launched. Project Echo. It wasn't a weapon, it was a hunt. Across Accord territories, specialized reconnaissance vessels were quietly outfitted with deep space sensors, gravitational field readers, and black box analyzers. These ships looked like cargo haulers or diplomatic transports, but each was a sensor array, disguised in plain sight. And they were listening, watching, waiting for the pattern. Because there's always a pattern. It took 7 weeks before they found one. A small anomaly, a repeating gravitational pulse, detected only in the outermost layers of certain disappeared systems, too subtle for normal ships to notice. But Earth's new tech had evolved since Eidolon. The pulse wasn't random. It was a signature, not of a weapon, but of a gateway, a controlled dimensional rift. The colonies hadn't been destroyed, they'd been moved. Earth kept the discovery quiet, even from the Accord, because the implications were terrifying. If the Veil could move entire populations into pocket dimensions or alternate space fields, they weren't just erasing history, they were building something else. But to what end? There was only one way to find out. They needed someone to go through the gate, not a drone, not a probe, a person. Someone who wouldn't crack under isolation. Someone who didn't just follow orders, but questioned them when they needed to. Someone human. Her name was Lyra Venn, a deep space pilot, ex-miner, had grown up on Europa's outer colonies and spent more time in vacuum suits than civilian clothes. She had no family left, no allegiances but Earth. She was, in every sense of the word, a ghost, perfect for infiltration. They gave her a vessel designed for the mission, small, fast, equipped with short-burst displacement shielding and experimental memory stabilizers. If the dimension on the other side of the gate was unstable, her brain wouldn't be scrambled the moment she crossed. She didn't ask questions, didn't need to. She'd seen the data, and she wanted answers. The moment she passed through the gateway, reality blurred, not violently, gently, like dipping your hand into warm water. But when she opened her eyes again, she realized just how wrong things were. The stars were still there, but wrong. bent, as if light itself had been refracted through trauma. The system was quiet. No radio chatter, no beacons, but her scanner lit up with life signs. Thousands. She pushed forward, and then she saw it. A planet. Artificial. Not terraformed. Not colonized. Constructed. It rotated slowly, held together by gravity wells and carbon lattice weaves, more advanced than anything even Earth had. Her ship's systems began failing the closer she got, so she went in manually. No weapons, no shields, just curiosity and a little human stubbornness. She landed on the surface, stepped out, and found them. The missing. They weren't prisoners, not in chains, not malnourished, but they weren't free either. Each person lived in a perfectly organized grid city. Every building identical, every person monitored, their memories scrambled, their histories erased. Lyra tried to speak to one of them, a Vishari elder who had gone missing 6 months earlier. He looked at her with blank eyes. "I am content," he said. "I am part of the system." She tried again. "You were taken from your home." He tilted his head. "What is home?" That's when she saw them. Observers. Tall figures in mirrored armor. Silent. No weapons visible. But Lyra felt it. Control. A grip so cold it didn't need to shout. She turned to run, but it was too late. They had seen her, and they weren't surprised. Back on Earth, the signal from Lyra's ship cut out 3 minutes after entry. Her transponder showed she was alive, but unreachable. That was enough. Project Echo was declared a red priority. Eidolon was activated, but not launched, not yet. First, Earth sent a message, not to the galaxy, not to the Accord, to the Veil. A simple phrase, "We found you." There was no reply, but 3 days later, a beacon was detected at the edge of Sol system. Not a trap, a message, one word. Why? Earth didn't respond publicly, but inside the highest levels of Accord command, the answer was clear. Why? Because you made us wait too long. Because you thought silence meant submission. Because when humanity's patience ends, it does not scream, it fights. And now, it was time to fight again. They waited. After Lyra vanished beyond the rift, Earth didn't launch ships, didn't deploy drones, didn't scream at the sky. They listened. The message they received from the Veil, just one word. Why? Wasn't a question. It was a test. And Earth understood what that meant. The Veil wasn't asking why they came. They were asking why they waited this long, why they hadn't struck first. Why Earth, for all its fury and technology, hadn't yet tried to wipe them out. It was arrogance. Arrogance disguised as curiosity. But Earth didn't take the bait. They knew what the Veil really wanted. Chaos. If Earth retaliated blindly, the Accord would fracture. Fear would return, and the galaxy would fall back into the shadows the Veil had crawled out of. No, Earth wasn't going to start a war. They were going to end one. But to do that, they needed to get Lyra back. Lyra didn't know how long she'd been there. Time passed strangely in the Veil's constructed world. The artificial planet had no sun, only a dull gray sky that never changed. The inhabitants, once vibrant, diverse, passionate, now moved like wind-up dolls, always busy, never questioning. She tried to speak with them, tried to connect, but something had rewritten them, stripped them of identity. She began keeping a journal on a scrap of plating she found near a comms tower, etching notes with a heated chip. She recorded everything, their speech patterns, routines, even the expressions they no longer had. She'd been trained for interrogation, espionage, survival in hostile environments, but not this. Not emptiness. And yet there was something underneath it all. A hum. A signal too deep for ordinary scanners. It wasn't natural. It wasn't even technological in the way she understood it. It was psychological. She heard it in her sleep. A whisper at the edge of her mind. Order brings peace. Your pain is unnecessary. Let go. She fought it. Repeated her name every morning. Her mission. Her planet. I'm Lyra Venn. Earthborn. Accord agent. Not yours. And every night, the whisper came back. In Sol Command, Earth's analysts finally cracked the pulse signature the Veil used to transport their captives. It wasn't just gravitational manipulation. It was dimensional redirection. Essentially, the veil didn't need to move ships physically. They moved the space around them. They folded the fabric of local reality until the target was no longer in this dimension. It wasn't something Earth could do. Not yet. But it was something they could track if they got close enough. That's when they launched the Vanguard Protocol. 5 ships, no weapons, no military flags, just sensor arrays, high-frequency decoys, and deep-range beacon relays. Their mission was simple: draw out the veil, not to fight, to find the door. It worked faster than expected. In the outer rim of Accord space, near a dying star, one of the ships detected a fold event. They sent a probe masked to resemble a drifting mining drone. What came back wasn't just a signal. It was a message from Lyra. It was fragmented, corrupted. Most of the file was white noise and static, but a few seconds came through, enough to make Earth hold its breath. I'm here. It's real. They're rewriting minds. Not with tech, with frequency. They hum. It gets inside you. Then silence. Then 4 final words, sharp and desperate. Don't trust the sky. No one knew what it meant, but Earth had seen enough. They mobilized a classified fleet under Project Echo Black. Eidolon was brought back online, not for offense, for rescue. But they knew it wouldn't be that simple. Inside the Veil's realm, Lyra had stopped sleeping. She couldn't tell dreams from thoughts anymore. She kept moving, kept writing, though her arms trembled and her stomach ached from the synthetic food cubes. The observers had started watching her more closely. They never moved quickly, never spoke, just stared, like statues made of thought. One day, while she was walking through Sector 7, she saw something strange, a glitch, a momentary flicker in the air, like heat distortion. She moved toward it, found a tower half fused with another building, the architecture pulsing like it was alive, and at its base, a door, not made for the inhabitants, made for her. When she touched it, something triggered. A voice rang in her head, this time not from the veil, but her own. I remember you, it whispered. Then she blacked out. When she awoke, she was in a white chamber. Not clean, sterile, too sterile, like reality had been scrubbed. A figure stood across from her, not an observer, a human, or something pretending to be. His face was symmetrical, too perfect, his eyes too still. Lyra Venn, he said. You're not real, she muttered. Neither are you, he replied. Not here. He sat, gestured for her to do the same. You're strong, stronger than most, but you will break. All things break in time. That's why we build systems. Systems that erase people? No, systems that save them from themselves. She clenched her fists. You call this saving? He tilted his head. This world has no war, no hunger, no lies. Every being here lives without fear, without pain. That is peace. That's slavery, she said. He didn't argue, just nodded slightly. That's what Earth said too. Back in Sol, the Echo Black fleet reached the anomaly's edge. Time was tight. The signal from Lyra had stopped again. They only had one shot. Eidolon transmitted a low-level graviton pulse at the fold's resonance frequency, carefully tuned to avoid triggering the Veil's defenses. The fold opened, a pinprick tear in space. Enough for one ship. Lyra's rescue vessel, the Arc Spear, launched through. Inside, Captain June Harlan stood at the helm, every muscle tense. He wasn't a diplomat. He wasn't a scientist. He was what Earth sent when everything else failed. His orders were simple: bring her home, or die trying. Inside the realm, Lyra felt the shift before the sky even changed. The hum paused. The observers froze. Something new had entered. Something that didn't belong. Then, for the first time in days, she smiled. She didn't know how Earth had found her, but she knew what was coming, and so did the Veil. The man pretending to be human stood, his expression finally cracking. They're reckless, he said. They'll tear open things they don't understand. She stood too. That's what you always feared, isn't it? He looked away. Humanity. Then the room shuddered, and the sky cracked. The Arc Spear punched through the Veil's dimension like a comet dipped in vengeance. The distortion screamed around the hull, but Earth tech held. Every sensor maxed out, Every warning light blared. But they had her signal, and they were going to her. Captain Harlan activated the beacon link. "Lyra, if you can hear this, we're coming." He didn't wait for a response. Didn't need one. Because deep in the cold heart of an artificial planet, surrounded by creatures that wore silence like armor, Lyra lifted her head and said the words that would go down in history. "I knew you'd come." The sky tore, not metaphorically, not as a figure of speech. It ripped like fabric, like a wound in a painting too perfect to be real. Light poured through it, but not the kind that warmed skin or guided ships. It was the cold, hungry light of reality, forcing its way into a place that had no right to exist. The Veil's artificial dimension, stable, quiet, symmetrical, screamed in silence as Earth's ship crossed over. The Arc-Spear. She wasn't a warship, but she might as well have been. Every inch of her hull was wrapped in graviton-shifting shielding. Her hull bristled with pulse disruptors, calibrated not for combat, but dimensional stabilization. Earth hadn't come to bomb this place. They'd come to break it open. Lyra felt it first, like someone whispering her name in her bloodstream. She was still standing in that impossibly white chamber when the temperature shifted. The walls rippled, the sterile air buzzed, and the observer who had been watching her, silent for hours, suddenly moved, not with threat, with urgency. "You brought it here," it said, voice no longer neutral. "You opened the gate." Lyra didn't flinch. "No," she replied. They opened the truth. The walls cracked. Outside, the false sky shattered into pieces of falling light. The Veil's dimension was collapsing, but not from violence, from exposure. Inside the Arc-Spear, Captain June Harlan kept his hands steady on the controls. The Veil's realm bent around them like rubber stretched too far. Their stabilizers fought every second to hold their position in place. Lights flickered. Gravity twitched. AI guidance failed 3 times in the first 5 minutes. But they were still flying, because Harlan wasn't flying for himself. He was flying for Lyra. "Tracking signal is bouncing," said his navigator. "Their space is unstable. Logic loops, recursive echoes, collapsing physics models. I don't even know what's real in here." "We don't need it to be real," Harlan growled. "We just need it to be over." Another pulse of energy shook the ship. External sensors picked up movement. Structures reconfiguring. Towers bending into fractal spirals. Cities folding in on themselves like burning paper. The Veil was trying to adapt, to erase the threat. But Earth tech wasn't conventional. Project Eidolon had taught them how to weaponize existence itself. The Arc-Spear was the result. A vessel built not to dominate, but to end illusions. Lyra ran. The chamber crumbled behind her. The voice that had pretended to be human screamed inside her skull. Not with words, but with raw data, desperate to override her thoughts. She clenched her fists, bit her tongue until she bled, and kept running. Outside, she saw the others. The colonists. The stolen. They were all standing still, eyes blank, humming in unison like puppets waiting for a hand. Lyra screamed,
"Wake up!"
No one moved, not until the ship came. When the Arc-Spear passed overhead, its hull rippling with human defiance, the hum stopped. And for a heartbeat, all those blank eyes blinked. The spell was breaking. The lie was dying. Captain Harlan's voice cut across the comms. "Visual on the ground. I see her. I see Jesus. What is that?" The city below them was folding, not collapsing, folding into itself, like it was trying to hide from being perceived. Buildings bent backward into spirals. Roads collapsed into pits of endless depth. The artificial gravity that once kept the colony stable was failing. But in the center of it all, Lyra stood, alive. Bloodied, smiling, she raised one hand, and the Arc-Spear dropped a tether. It wasn't clean, wasn't smooth, but it was enough. Lyra jumped, and the moment her boots left the ground, the world below screamed. The Veil wasn't just angry, it was afraid. She landed hard inside the rear cabin, collapsing to her knees. Captain Harlan was already there, grabbing her arm, checking her vitals. "You okay?" he barked. Lyra coughed, spit blood, and nodded. "I remembered who I was." Harlan smiled, rough and tired. That's all I needed to hear. Then the ship rocked again. The veil wasn't letting them go. Across the veil's false dimension, structures began detonating. Not with fire, but with data corruption. The world was losing cohesion. Like a hard drive full of bad sectors, it flickered and tore itself apart, trying to keep up. And in its core, a voice, the one Lyra had heard whispering for days, rose up in fury. You were meant to submit. You were meant to obey. You were meant to let go. And then it turned from her to Earth. You brought rot to order, emotion to logic. You are the anomaly. And Earth finally answered. Captain Harlan's voice was calm. Yeah, that's kind of our thing. Then they fired the payload. It wasn't a bomb. It wasn't a gun. It was a broadcast. A frequency signal embedded with emotional resonance, personalized to every known species Earth had cataloged. The result of years of research into neural harmonics, memory anchoring, and consciousness coding. In simple terms, they reminded everyone who they were. A pulse of raw identity blasted from the Arc Spear's hull, sweeping across the Veil's artificial cities, washing over every captive mind like a sonic tidal wave. Names, faces, memories, songs, pain, joy, humanity. Not because humans were better, but because humans had suffered and learned. In that moment, the stolen remembered themselves, and the Veil began to lose them. The colonists began to scream, not in pain, but in awakening. Eyes once dull now burned, mouths opened, hands clenched. The grip the Veil had held for so long shattered like glass underfoot, and the dimension, unable to hold that much raw emotion, began to disintegrate. The arc spear banked hard towards the gate, dragging gravity distortions behind it. Lyra sat in the rear cabin, eyes wide, tears falling freely as she looked out the window and saw everyone waking up. You came for me? She whispered. Harlan's voice buzzed from the intercom. We always come back for our own. Back in the Accord core systems, Earth transmitted a final message to the galaxy. No dramatic speeches, no threats, just a report. The Veil has been exposed. Their technology was not magic. It was theft, refined over centuries. We retrieved our people. Their dimension is failing. We will no longer be patient with those who erase others to preserve control. Then a final line, simple and calm. The age of silence is over. Lyra recovered slowly. Her mind had scars no scan could see, but she wasn't broken. She walked through Earth's skies again, breathed unfiltered air, listened to real birds instead of artificial hums, and she spoke at the Accord Assembly. Just once, she stood before hundreds of species, every eye on her, and said, they built a world with no pain, but they had to erase everything good to do it. That's not peace. That's extinction wearing a friendly mask. Then she stepped down, and not one delegate said a word in response. Because what could they say? She was right. The Veil didn't return. Whatever was left of them sank into the deepest shadows of uncharted space, their fake heaven crumbling behind them. The gate was sealed, and Earth watched, not with fear, but with resolve. Because they knew now, it wasn't about dominance. It wasn't even about survival. It was about remembrance of who they were, of what had been done to them, and what would never be allowed again. For the first time in generations, the galaxy was truly still. No great wars raged. No fleets shadowed each other across contested borders. The echoes of the Veil's collapse rippled through every system, not as a sound, but as a silence that meant something different now. Peace, but not the kind enforced through fear, like the Council had imposed, and not the hollow obedient stillness that the Veil had manufactured through mind control. This was something raw, unpolished, difficult, real peace, the kind humanity had always dreamed of, but no one, not even they, knew what to do with once they had it. Because peace, they learned, is not the end of struggle. It is the beginning of responsibility. The Accord had grown in strength and legitimacy. What had once been dismissed as Earth's desperate bid for relevance had become the single most powerful alliance in the known galaxy, not because it held the biggest weapons, but because it held trust. Trust earned through pain, not promises. Over 247 species had formally joined. Even former council loyalists, shamed and reformed, were now standing beneath the banner of shared accountability. Trade flowed. Research was open. Power was decentralized. The council, what was left of it, existed only in history logs and criminal hearings. And Earth? Earth stayed quiet. No thrones. No flags on every world. No self-appointed control over the Accord. Just a quiet seat at the table, one of many. Though everyone knew what it cost for them to get there, Lyra then became more than a symbol. Her testimony had torn down what was left of the Veil's sympathizers. When she spoke, it wasn't to rile crowds or stir fear. It was to explain in plain words what it meant to survive manipulation, how it felt to forget yourself, how much strength it took to remember. After her speech, dozens of worlds passed their own independence declarations, not from Earth, but from the mental control models the old council had hidden in education systems, trade agreements, even neural implants disguised as health monitors. She spoke for the forgotten, not for vengeance, but for clarity. And across the stars, beings began to understand something Earth had known for a long time. Tyranny never announces itself with a sword. It arrives wearing a smile, but not everyone accepted this new peace. Some didn't believe Earth was sincere. They saw shadows where there were none, believed the humans had simply replaced one empire with another. And to some extent, Earth understood that fear. After all, hadn't they themselves been afraid of the Council once? So Earth did what no other power ever had. They shared everything. Blueprints, military specs, ship designs, even parts of Eidolon's architecture, minus its most dangerous capabilities, were declassified and published for all Accord members. No secrets, no hierarchy, not to weaken themselves, but to remove fear, to say, we are not holding this over you, we are holding it with you. But transparency comes at a cost, because not everyone uses knowledge for peace. In a mining colony orbiting Drexus First, a system long isolated from galactic politics, a new anomaly was detected. Faint energy pulses, rhythmic, familiar, too familiar. Earth recognized the signature, a fragment of the Veil's dimensional technology. The broadcast hadn't died with the realm. It had spread, a seed planted in deep space, maybe by design, maybe by accident. But now, it was growing. A single colony began to change. At first, the miners just worked longer hours, said they didn't need sleep, said they felt the rhythm of the system. Then they stopped responding to standard check-ins. By the time an Accord patrol ship arrived, the colony was unrecognizable. Perfectly clean, no waste, no sound, no individuality, just hundreds of beings moving in harmony, humming the same low tone. The Veil had been defeated, but its infection had not. Earth didn't panic. They didn't attack. They studied. And what they discovered chilled even the most seasoned strategists. The Veil hadn't just manipulated people. It had implanted its frequency into space itself. A slow virus, one that latched onto artificial energy signatures, weak minds, or emotional imbalance. It could lie dormant for years, maybe centuries, until something stirred it awake. And now it had. Earth proposed the creation of signal purity teams, multi-species coalitions, trained not for war, but for containment and cognitive restoration. Psychologists, engineers, spiritual leaders, veterans of Veil captivity. The goal wasn't to destroy infected zones, it was to heal them. Some called it naive, but most called it the most human thing they'd ever seen. Lyra was asked to lead one such team. She declined military rank, insisted on going in plain clothes. "I won't be a savior," she said, "just a mirror. Let them see themselves again." Her first deployment was to Outpost 9, a deep space relay station that had gone silent for 18 days. When she arrived, the station was dark. Its crew, still alive, floated in a catatonic state, barely speaking, eyes locked on invisible shapes in the walls. It took 4 days to restore partial memory, 10 to restore identity. One crew member didn't survive, but the rest, they remembered. And when they spoke Lyra's name, it wasn't with reverence, it was with recognition. "You made us human again," one of them said. Lyra just shook her head. "You always were. You just forgot. In the halls of Accord's diplomacy, debates raged, not over Earth's power, but over Earth's philosophy. What does it mean to lead without control? What does it mean to teach without conquest? No one had ever done it before, and many believed Earth couldn't maintain it. Power, they argued, always corrupts. But Earth had learned the hard way that power is not just about force. It's about resistance, not against others, but against the temptation to become what you once fought. So they held back. They let other species take lead roles. They refused to let their fleet become the center of Accord's defense. Instead, they pushed education, collaboration, adaptation. They pushed what had always made humanity dangerous, not its weapons, but its ideas. Then one day, a new signal arrived, not from within the galaxy, from outside it. A probe, old, cracked, barely functional. It broadcast only once before its systems collapsed. We are not your enemy, but they are coming, and you are the only ones they fear. Earth received the signal first, and said nothing for 2 days. When they finally showed it to the Accord, many demanded to know why they waited. Earth's reply was simple. Because we wanted to be sure we weren't the threat they were running from. For the first time since the fall of the Council, fear returned to the galaxy, not from Earth, but from the unknown beyond the galactic rim, the stars beyond the stars. Who were they, and why did they fear Earth? The answer didn't come in ships, not yet, but the anticipation was worse. Because everyone knew, if something scared the species that once erased colonies without blinking, if something made the veil hide like vermin in cracks of false realities, then it was something darker, something worse, and the only ones it feared were us. The message from beyond the edge of the galaxy, played in every Accord chamber, every planetary council, every listening station that still had the courage to keep its antennas up. We are not your enemy, but they are coming, and you are the only ones they fear. It wasn't the words that sent a chill through the galaxy. It was the silence that followed. No origin signature, no known language. The voice was artificially generated, translated into every dialect the probe could detect, and then it went dead. But it hadn't arrived at random. It had found Earth first, and that meant something. To some, it meant Earth was to blame. To others, it meant Earth was the only hope left. Either way, one thing became painfully clear. Whatever was coming, it had run into humans before. Lyra Venn stood on the upper deck of the Unity Spire, the Accord's newly constructed diplomatic station, floating between neutral sectors as a beacon of shared trust. Below her, dozens of species walked together, real peace, not enforced silence. She watched a group of young Vishari children laughing as they played with artificial gravity lifts, overseen by a retired human engineer. It should have brought her joy, but her body didn't relax, not since the signal. Because deep down, Lyra knew something she hadn't yet said aloud. She'd felt it long ago during her captivity in the Veil's false dimension. That whisper that haunted her mind. The rhythmic hum that tried to overwrite her memory. It wasn't created by the Veil. It had been borrowed, mimicked. The Veil hadn't invented control. They had studied it, learned it, and now, Lyra was starting to believe that what was coming next, the thing the message had warned them about, wasn't afraid of Earth because of its weapons. It was afraid of what Earth had survived, because it had failed to break them, just like the Council had, just like the Veil. The Earth United Assembly, now acting as the ethical spine of the Accord, called for a silent session. No recordings, no media, no delegates, only the species who had fought side by side in the years since Curium Station. Some wanted to fortify borders. Others suggested preemptive probes. A few radical voices asked if it was time to start thinking about controlled first strikes in case the incoming threat was already embedded. But Earth didn't speak first. They listened. Then, from the human seat, a woman named Commander Yelani, once a child survivor of a Council labor camp, stood. Her voice was calm, clear, unapologetic. We are not afraid of what's coming, but we are not blind. We've waited too long in the past, trying to be understood. This time, we prepare. A Zalan representative asked, "Prepare for war?" Yelani shook her head. "No, prepare for a test of who we've become." Earth did not build a new fleet. They built a network, not of weapons, of memory. Using fragments of Veil technology, AI assistance, and the combined computing power of 20 Accord species, they created something unprecedented, a cognitive resonance archive. They called it the Witness Protocol. Its function? To preserve truth. Every Accord citizen was invited, voluntarily, to contribute memories, personal stories, testimonies, family histories, not edited for image, not filtered for politics, raw, unflinching, the good, the bad, the ugly, from human civil wars to alien revolutions, from council betrayals to Veil liberation. Every piece was uploaded, not to shame, but to remember, because they now understood something simple. When you forget where you come from, you're easy to control. At the edge of Accord space, exploratory drones began disappearing. No explosions, no flares, just vanished. But this time, Earth wasn't caught off guard. They had eyes everywhere now. And when the first drone managed to send back a corrupted visual before losing power, analysts worked for 72 hours straight to stabilize a single image. The picture was simple, terrifying. A moon drifting through space, hollowed out into a giant black eye, and carved across its surface in language unknown, yet somehow understood, were 5 words. "We warned you to kneel." The room went quiet. No one laughed this time, because what they saw was not just a weapon, it was a message. But Earth didn't flinch. Instead, they sent their own message, not to the threat, but to the galaxy. "We will not kneel, not because we seek war, but because we remember what kneeling cost us the last time. If they come for us, they come for all of us, and we will stand together." It spread like wildfire. On backwater worlds, graffiti sprayed in markets read, "Remember Kyrell." On mining colonies, workers carved, "We stand now," into metal support beams. Even old council species whispered the phrase in council halls, "No more silence." It wasn't just humanity's patience that had run out now. It was the galaxy's. Then, the arrival happened. A rift torn wide near the dark edge of Sector 19, a stretch of space long thought uninhabitable. Out of it came nothing. Not a ship, not a fleet, just a pulse, like the psychic echo of something enormous thinking about waking up. And in systems light years away, sensitive minds collapsed. Empaths bled from the nose. Machines rewrote their own logs in languages no one recognized. It was as if reality itself twitched. But the Accord did not panic. They activated the Witness Protocol across every system. And Earth made a choice no empire in history had ever made. They sent their most vulnerable, their truth, to meet the dark. Lyra Van was chosen to be the envoy, not a soldier, not a fleet commander, just a woman who had survived being erased, and remembered herself anyway. She boarded a vessel not designed for war, but for translation, emotional, historical, neurological. She took nothing with her but her name, and a small object, the jagged metal scrap she had used to carve her thoughts during her time in the Veil, inscribed with only 4 words, "I know who I am." She crossed the rift alone. The stars bent, time slowed. She floated into darkness, deeper than space, deeper than gravity, deeper than thought. And then she heard it. A voice without voice, a shape without form, a presence. "You do not belong here," she spoke back without fear. "I do now. You remember too much." "I remember enough. You are not like the others." "No," she said. "I'm worse, because we waited and waited, and still chose not to become you." Silence. Then, "Why have you come?" She looked up into the void, and said the one thing no other race had dared say before. "Not to beg, not to kneel, to warn you." The darkness blinked. "Warn us?" She leaned forward, fierce, human. "We are the ones you couldn't break, the ones who rose after betrayal, who built peace from bones, who watched their patience turn into fire. We are what comes after fear." The stars around her twisted. Time shook, but she held her ground and smiled. "You should be afraid." Back in Accord space, the rift shuddered, and then closed. Lyra's signal returned. She was alive, and something else returned too. A second signal. This one not from the dark, but from every Accord system. A unanimous broadcast from civilians, officers, farmers, soldiers, children. We remember. A whisper. A chant. A vow. And so the galaxy stood, not just because of Earth's defiance, but because of humanity's legacy, that when pushed to the edge, when erased, humiliated, enslaved, or betrayed, humanity did not conquer. They endured, they waited, and when they rose, they carried others with them. And that's why in every corner of every world, from frost-covered moons to the oceanic cities of former enemies, statues were raised, not of soldiers, but of a single human woman, carved holding a small scrap of metal, one hand outstretched, not in power, but in invitation. Beneath it, only one line. We asked for peace. You gave us graves. Now we build something you can't bury. The galaxy would never forget, because Earth never let them, because Lyra never let them, because when the moment finally came, humanity did not kneel. They stood, and the stars stood with them.